Hi, in this video I want to give you a quick introduction on our installer and how you can use it to set up a Gardener on a GKE cluster as easily as possible. First, let's get to the things you need. You need a GCP account with enough quota, and you also need to have at least one domain registered in the Google Cloud DNS on that account. I have this domain here, so that is done. Then you should create a service account and download the credentials for it. The necessary roles to use the Gardener are these. So your service account should have these permissions in order to work properly. Next step would be to create a GKE cluster. So this is the standard cluster creation dialog. You can choose some name, for example, my gardener or whatever, doesn't matter. When choosing the zone, keep in mind that the installer is somewhat limited in choices, so you can't choose every zone here. I will go with Eurobest. I will just take the latest Kubernetes version offered by GKE. Okay, now regarding the nodes, if you choose the N1 standard 2 nodes, a rough estimate is that you need 3 nodes for the Gardener itself, plus 1 additional node per shoot cluster you want to create with that Gardener. So if you want to create 1 shoot just for testing purposes, then 4 nodes will be enough. If you plan to do bigger tests and run more shoots, then you should think about taking bigger nodes or enabling autoscaling. It is important that you activate the basic credentials, basic authentication down here. We will need that later. Also, remember this node setter, sorry. We will also need that later. You can leave the rest on default and just click create. I already did that, and the result is a cluster like this. First thing we have to do now is we have to get the kubeconfig for that cluster and modify it. You can get the kubeconfig by clicking on connect, copy the command, and run it in your terminal. You need to have gcloud enabled for that. And this will create your kubeconfig, but unfortunately we can't use this kubeconfig as it is. I will show you why. The kubeconfig you get looks something like this. So it has GCP specific authentication configuration here, and the Gardener needs things that are cloud provider independent for authentication, so we can't use the gcloud thing here. Therefore, we enabled the basic authentication before. So if you go back to your cluster, you will find a show credentials button here. You can click that, copy the password, and then modify your kubeconfig. Under user, just write username. You could also copy that from the dialog, but it's always admin for GKE, as far as I noticed at least. And for password, you put your password there. save, and then that is done. Now go to your terminal. You can quickly verify that everything is there and yeah, communication works. Just one quick note. When you create your kubeconfig via the gcloud command, it's best to have the kubeconfig environment variable point to a non-existing file before, because then the command will actually create a new kubeconfig, which looks like the one I just showed you. If it points to an existing kubeconfig, the gcloud command will merge the new kubeconfig into and modify the context, which makes things more complicated than they need to be. So in my case, I've already set my kubeconfig to the correct file, and I can check my cluster now. And as you can see, it's a standard GKE Kubernetes cluster. So now let's get to the installer. You have some fields here. The left part slightly varies depending on which cloud provider you use. The right part is always the same. In this example, we will use GCP. So as I said, your choices are somewhat limited in this installer. If you want to test it on another region, I will tell you how to do that later. Just, yeah, I chose the same region I used for my cluster. Just enable all the zones. Now for credentials, for Google, credentials come in form of a JSON file, which you can download from your service account. As mentioned earlier, there are tutorials on how to generate that out there, so I won't explain that here in detail. Just import your JSON file here, and you're done for that. Kubeconfig, here you upload your kubeconfig you just changed. And for the domain, you have to choose a subdomain of one of the domains registered in your gcloud account. So for me, I have this. So I will just use it and append something before, like for example, this. For email, you can choose anything as long as it looks like a valid email address. You won't get any emails there, and it doesn't actually have to be valid. Let me choose installer at Gardener Cloud. Password, choose whichever password you want. And now for the sitters. Remember that I mentioned you had to keep in mind the nodes sitter that GCP shows you in the cluster creation dialog. You have to put that here in case you forgot it, and because GKE does show the one for pod and service, but not the one for nodes here, or maybe somewhere here. But if you forgot it, you can just go to your cluster, or maybe if you don't know it, you can just go to your cluster and do a kubectl get nodes -o wide, and then you will you can check the internal IPs, and with some kind of educated guessing, you can find out your subnet sitter. These are actual dependent on where and how you got your Kubernetes cluster. So for GKE, it shows the node sitter when in the cluster creation dialog, and it's also always the same for the same region. So if you create a cluster in UBrest 1, you will always have the 10 132.0.o. Slash I guess 20. If you create your cluster in another way, you might search a bit to find the CIDR, or in the worst case you might have to guess it if it doesn't show up anywhere. So that needs to go here. Then, as just mentioned, pod and service CIDR are shown if you after the cluster is created. So you can just copy them. Okay, so now the configuration of the installer is basically complete. If you scroll down a bit, you will find the interesting part here. There are two files you can download. You could do that now. The Gardener deploy file and the Gardener undeploy file. These are both YAML files, Kubernetes manifests that can be applied with a kubectl apply. And that's basically all you need to do now. How does it look like? I can show you how the file looks. So it creates, the deploy file creates 3 resources. It creates a secret that contains your kubeconfig and the aq.yaml file, which is the configuration file for Garden setup that will deploy your Gardener. I will mention that later again. It creates a persistent volume claim. There, basically, the state of Garden setup is stored. So you should not delete this as long as your Gardener is running. And after you undeployed your Gardener, you can delete it. And the third thing is a pod, which will basically run Garden setup in your cluster and spin up a Gardener. So let's try this. Yeah, and that's basically it. You can now watch the pod, and once it comes up, you can watch the logs of the pod to see Garden setup in action. That should be happening soon. Yeah. So, and this is basically Garden setup. And it will take quite some time. And once the pod is completed, your Gardener is ready. In the meantime, the aforementioned Garden setup, this is a Git project to create a Gardener. And it's what is used by the installer in the background. So the installer actually generates a configuration file for Garden setup and then runs Garden setup. To make the installer as easy as possible, we restricted the configuration possibilities. So that's why you have quite a small amount of configuration to do. Garden setup can actually do a lot more. So if you want more complicated things, like, for example, you have your domain hosted on another cloud provider, for example, in Route 53, or you want monitoring, you want multiple, you want to be able to create clusters on multiple cloud providers with your Gardener instead of just one. This is all possible, but not with the installer. You may want to dig into Garden setup then, but it has quite a long documentation. Yeah. Okay, I skipped some time. Didn't take too long to finish. That depends on the infrastructure provider you choose. kubectl get pods will show you that the pod is finished. As you can see, for me, it took around 10 minutes. Yeah, as I said, sometimes it takes a little bit longer, sometimes it's fast. If it ever crashes in the middle, gets an error, you can check the logs of the pod to see what caused the error. Maybe you configured something wrong, for example, gave invalid credentials. Then you can fix that. And if it was just, for example, a random network problem that should be gone by now, you can just reapply the deploy file. Well, delete the pod first because it's an error state, then reapply the deploy file that will create the pod again. And the installer will pick up on the latest component that it didn't fully install. Yeah, so if it's finished, you can check and you will see there are a lot more pods now than before. So we have the garden namespace and the extension namespaces, and this contains the gardener. And how do you use it? You can use the gardener programmatically, but you can also use the dashboard. You will find a link to the dashboard in the installer. You might want to open this in an incognito window. This is because the installer uses self-signed certificates, which are untrusted by your browser. And if you create a gardener and then delete again and create again one, your browser might notice that you are using the same domain multiple times, and each time it has a different but still untrusted certificate, and at some point your browser might decide to not give you the option to ignore that anymore. So this doesn't happen if you use incognito mode. If you use Garden Setup instead of the installer, you can also configure it to use a trusted certificate, which are requested from Let's Encrypt. If you don't do that, you will have to ignore this warning. And then you get to the Gardener front page. Login. Here you have to use the email address you chose before and the password. And then you're good to go. You will have one project already there. Your credentials are already put into a secret, so you, if you want, you can start right away creating clusters. As you can see, the installer gives you only the option to use the infrastructure that you built it on. As mentioned before, with a Garden Setup, you can also configure additional infrastructures. Okay, so if you want to get rid of the gardener on your cluster again, then you just apply the undeploy manifest, which you downloaded from here, and that is basically only pod manifest and starts also runs Garden Setup, but with a different set of arguments that will uninstall everything that was installed by Garden Setup. You should not do this if you have any shoot clusters on your gardener. If you try to do it while you have shoots on your gardener, it will fail because there are safety checks in Garden setup that prevent an accidental deletion of your gardener cluster while there are still shoots running on. So this time we use the undeploy script that will create another pod, which is called garden setup uninstaller. And as before, you can monitor the progress by inspecting the logs. And it will start to delete your garden again. Okay, I skipped until the deletion was finished. Now, so if you check your cluster, you can see that nearly everything that was deployed is gone. So you will notice there are 2 pods left in the default namespace with state completed. Unless you want to access the logs later, you can delete them. And there's also the PVC with the state of garden setup. As mentioned earlier, as long as your garden is running, you must not delete that. If you deleted the garden again, like I did in this example, then you can also delete the PVC. So and now they are gone. Yeah. Now you can safely delete your GKE cluster again.